On January 4th, 2021, Representative John Sarbanes of the 3rd District in Maryland introduced H.R. 1, also known as the For the People Act of 2021, to the House of Representatives. The bill passed the House in a 220 to 210 vote on March 3rd and is currently waiting for the Senate to review and vote on it. This is actually the second time that the bill has reached the Senate. In 2019, the House voted on and passed H.R. 1 onto the Senate, but during that time, the Senate was not able to vote on it and pass it into law. H.R. 1 has a massive focus on expanding voting rights across the United States and is divided into 3 divisions. The first division is the focus of this video, with the remaining 2 videos focusing on the remainder. Division A, titled Voting, is further divided into 3 titles.
Title I Election Access is the first title of the bill and falls under Division A. Its focus is on expanding the ability of people to cast ballots in the first place. The first part of the title is concerned with getting more people registered to vote. It mandates that each state have an online and functional voter registration website, mandates the allowal of same-day voter registration, and creates new grants to states in order to promote voter registration amongst minors. Additionally, certain post-secondary institutions will have a campus vote coordinator that would transmit information regarding voting registration, procedures, and locations to students on campus at least twice a year. Competitive grants would also be created and given to colleges and universities that have strongly and successfully promoted student voter registration. The bill also outlaws deception and interference to a person's voting and registration process. It would be illegal for any person to corruptly hinder, interfere with, or prevent another person from registering to vote. An attempt to interfere and actually committing the interference are held to the same level in a court of law. It will also be illegal for a person to spread information by any medium with the intent to stop a person from voting in the 60 days before Election Day. Additionally, chief state election administration officials will now be prohibited from taking an active role in a political campaign in the election that they are currently supervising. H.R. 1 will also tighten the ability for registered voters to be removed from registration lists on the basis of voter caging or interstate cross-checks. This is how voter caging works. A document is sent over to a registered voter, which the voter has to respond to. However, if that document were to somehow be rendered undeliverable, it would serve as grounds for that person to be removed from the voter registry. Interstate cross-checks is when an election official of one state transmits information regarding a voter to an election official of another state. The For the People Act will also strengthen the standards for paper ballots. Paper ballots must be made easily readable to those with visual impairments or other disabilities. They must also be printed on paper durable enough to withstand multiple recounts without compromising the integrity of the vote. Absentee voting will also be expanded through this act. If an individual is eligible to vote in person, then states won't be allowed to impose additional conditions before that person is eligible to vote by mail. Additionally, the dependents and spouses of overseas military personnel are considered to be residents of their home state for the purposes of voting, even if they are currently overseas. Another focus of the bill was democracy restoration, which is aimed at restoring the right to vote in individuals that have been previously convicted of a crime. With this change, it would be unlawful for a state to deny the voter registration of a person on the basis of a past criminal offense, unless that person is currently serving a felony sentence at the time of registration. Finally, the title wraps up with a series of changes that would improve an individual's ability to cast their ballot. The period for early voting would be made more standardized across states. Sites must also be open a certain number of hours before and after the typical working hours of 9 through 5, and ensure that no person has to wait for longer than 30 minutes in order to cast a vote. Polling places must also be able to accommodate the movement of disabled persons, and more accommodations will be made to polling places located on Indian lands. States would also be required to provide drop boxes to submit absentee ballots and will no longer be able to restrict curbside voting. New standards that will be consistent across the state will be adopted for the handling of all provisional ballots. A provisional ballot is defined as a ballot casted by an individual whose voter registration status has been called into question. They are allowed to cast a ballot, but their vote will not be counted until the issue surrounding their registration status is resolved. Under this law, states will now have to establish plans that would outline how voting will still be able to continue under a state of emergency, such as a natural disaster or pandemic. State and local election officials will also be responsible for leading public information campaigns and distributing this information to the general public in the event that such a state of emergency arises. Voters that normally would have needed to provide a form of identification prior to casting their ballots may instead sign an affidavit affirming their identity under the penalty of perjury. Other miscellaneous provisions of the bill include new grants will be created and granted to states with a focus on improving poll worker recruitment and training. Federal election laws will now apply to the United States territories as well. These include Puerto Rico, Guam, American Samoa, the Virgin Islands, and the Northern Mariana Islands. Passage of the law would prompt the start of a study analyzing the effects of adopting a ranked choice voting system and how it would affect the United States election system. There would also be a study on voter turnout rates, with one focus of that study being an analysis on areas that would allow voting by the age of 16. And finally, Election Day will now be a legal public holiday.
H.R. 1 reaffirms its commitment to the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act to ensure greater accountability for state and local administrations of elections. It's also aimed at countering recent election regulation laws introduced by mainly Republican state legislature members after last year's elections. The bill will also establish a congressional task force on voting rights of the United States to investigate the economic and societal consequences of political disenfranchisement, as well as impediments to full voting rights and representation in the nation. Taking aim at the practice of gerrymandering, the bill requires multi-partisan congressional redistricting to be conducted via an independent state commission. An independent, nonpartisan redistricting commission is designated in every state. A subtitle in this H.R. 1 title is called the Save Voters Act, which supplements the National Voter Registration Act of 1993 by requiring objective and reliable evidence of ineligibility to remove voters from offices' lists of registered voters. The goal of this act is to, as H.R. 1 states, save eligible voters from voter purging.
In Title III, the bill tries to ensure the election security of our nation. In Subtitle A, it addresses the need to provide more financial support to improve the voting system security in the states. States will be able to use grants to replace their voting systems in compliance with the Voter Confidence and Increased Accessibility Act of 2021. Additionally, grants will be provided to improve voting system security improvements such as cyber and risk mitigation training and enhancing the cybersecurity of voter registration systems. Grants will also be provided for each state for risk-limiting investigations in post-election processes to ensure the validity of the election. The financial support sections of the bill will go in effect for the November 2022 election. In Subtitle B or Part 3, the bill also amends sections of the Homeland Security Act of 2002 to further improve the stability and threat detection of the election infrastructure when states request it. It requests an annual report on assistance and assessment of foreign threats to congressional committees. Furthermore, the Department of National Intelligence must submit a pre-election threat assessment no later than 180 days prior to a regularly scheduled general elections for federal office. This shall be enacted starting in November 2022. In Subtitle C, the Secretary of Education, State, Defense, and Homeland Security, as well as the Attorney General, the Director of National Intelligence, and the Chairman of the Federal Election Commission, are asked to devise a national strategy to combat against cyber attacks, influence operations, disinformation campaigns, and other activities that undermine the integrity of the election process. Additionally, it calls for the establishment of the National Commission to protect United States democratic institutions, to counter efforts to undermine the democratic institution in the country. Overall, the Division A of H.R. 1 aims to improve the election security of the United States that has been a topic of hot discussion in the past months.